Did you know that the Royal Marines, yes, the Royal Marines that I was a part of, are the only people in the world to have taken over the White House and burnt it down? Okay. A few years ago, I was living in America, right? You all know this story already. I'm a US citizen. I had my citizenship over there. I've been there for 9 years. Super proud. I am very proud that I am both a US citizen and a UK citizen, as well as a former Royal Marines commando. Very proud of all these aspects of my life. But there was this one moment when I was living in the US and my dad came to visit. He came over, we're having a chat, you know, we're talking, we're eating, we're having some fun. And he says, you know, it was your boys that are the only people in the world to have taken over the White House. And at first I was a bit like, what do you mean? Like, I don't think anyone has ever taken over the White House. He's like, no, the British took the White House, but it was your boys. And I was like, what do you mean, my boys? He said, it was the Royal Marines. The Royal Marines are the only people to have ever taken over the White House. And it absolutely blew my mind. And it's a bit more elaborate than that. So we're going to get into the story today of the burning of Washington in 1814. And it is quite the story. But before we get started, let's check out today's sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by Chug. These have been absolutely amazing here on this channel. They've been a channel sponsor now for a little while, and I genuinely absolutely love this cup. It is the best drinking vessel in the world, in my opinion, and it's made by a small business here in the UK. If you want to look like an absolute legend while drinking your drink, 10% off, link down below. They've got multiple colors. They come in this incredible bag. You open them up. Look at this. Absolute premium quality. Nice stainless steel inside, rope handle, the whole shebang, and it can even be customized with your initials. Absolutely fantastic. 10% off, link down below. Do not miss it. Go and get them right now. Of course, the story I picked today is going to be one that is going to cause lots of comments in the comment section. Yes, it is the Americans versus the British, but I come at this as a neutral. I am both a US and a UK citizen. Yes, I was in the Royal Marines. You can see my green beret up there, but I come at this from a neutral, from a place where I didn't know that this story was even a thing. And so I wanted to learn as much as I can about this and share this story with you guys because I think it's absolutely fascinating. Okay, let's give a little bit of context before we get into the battle in 1814. It's the War of 1812, okay, which there's four major aspects of this. You've got the Americans, you've got British-owned Canada, you've got Britain, and you've got France. Now, Britain is fighting that tiny guy over in France, Napoleon. They're fighting him, while they're also taking US citizens and throwing them in the Royal Navy to defeat Napoleon, whilst also blocking trade. So the British are up to the usual no good, as you would expect, doing things they shouldn't be doing. The Americans, on the other side of the planet, are thinking, well, the Brits are being turds right now, so, Canada's really nice. So they start thinking we should start taking Canada. That's kind of the political chessboard, if you look at it, until one major thing happens in 1814. Britain defeats Napoleon. Once Napoleon was defeated, the Brits could turn around and say, okay, let's put all our resources and attention on fighting the US and preventing them from invading Canada, which it ultimately, the War of 1812 ultimately ended in a bit of a stalemate, right? Canada gained, what did they ever gain? They were Canada still. The Brits were still up to their mischievous no good, and the US gained a bit of pride like they always do in every war. So nothing really much happened apart from this specific event, which although nothing really came of it, it's still a bizarre event. When it was all kicking off, the Brits turned around and said, we really need to do something to stomp on American pride. We need to do something that really kicks them down. And for them, it was, let's go to Washington, D.C., and let's take over it. Let's be honest, nothing really says we mean business than taking over a country's fancy new government buildings. So the British dropped in 4,500 troops and Royal Marines. They weren't just Royal Marines. There was 4,500 troops and Royal Marines, led by probably the most stereotypical British officer you will ever see in your life, Major General Robert Ross. Here he is, guys. We got him. Ladies and gentlemen, if you put in ChatGPT, please draw me a picture of the most obvious British officer. This guy would pop up. Look at him. Handsome little fella. Anyway, he is supported by a guy called Rear Admiral George Cockburn. Now, I understand that a lot of last names come from having a trade back in the day, right? You get people called Bill Smith because their great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather used to be a blacksmith. I don't know where you get the name Cockburn from, but I'll let you Google that one. So 4,500 troops and Royal Marines, including Robert Ross and Cockburn, get dropped into Bladensburg, Maryland, or as I like to call it, or I called it when I was in America to wind people up, Maryland, because that's how it's spelled. They get dropped in there, and so begins the Battle of Bladensburg. Now, you have to remember, it was the British military pushing in as much force as possible against what at the time was an inexperienced militia in the US capital at this moment in time. They weren't very experienced soldiers, and they were up against the Brits who, let's be honest, they've pretty much been going all over the world at this point, doing a bunch of damage. So they're really good soldiers. And so this road to Washington was quite easy for the British. In fact, they started making a mockery of the US by calling it the races of Bladensburg because of the amount of US individuals who were running away as fast as they can. I'm not saying this as some sort of dig. You have to remember, this is a very, very experienced military going up against these militias, right? And although it's not to the extent of maybe like the Romans versus Boudica, it's definitely still quite a big gap in experience. So the road to Washington, which the Brits expected to be way more difficult than it actually was quite easy for the Brits. They basically marched into Washington with very little resistance whatsoever. And so they get into Washington. When the Brits march into Washington, they pretty much obliterate everything and take everything. Now, the president at the time, President James Madison, and First Lady Dolly Madison fled the city. But one interesting thing that I've read from this is Dolly, the First Lady, famously saved a portrait of George Washington and other valuables before leaving the White House, which I'm not saying that she's a bit of a fangirl, but to go back into a White House when you are under attack to save a picture of George Washington, either you are so patriotic, it's unbelievable, or you're a bit of a fangirl. And I'd like to believe she's a bit of both, let's be honest. When they walked into the White House, it was completely abandoned. In fact, apparently they walked into a room and there was a table completely laid out for a full dinner for the Madisons. And the Brits sat down and just ate it all before burning everything. So the Brits burnt everything. They burnt the White House, the US Capitol, the Treasury, the War Department, and multiple other buildings. They were using furniture and documents and whatever they could to literally burn everything, which, as someone who is a bit of a history freak, it makes me incredibly sad that that's the first thing you go to when it comes to taking over a place, because there is probably so much historical documents, which at the end of the day, it's 1814, so a lot of the documents in there might have been duplicated and they might have been able to save a lot of stuff. But my guess is there was probably a lot of artwork and incredible pieces of document that will never be seen again because of burning. And maybe it's because part of me always wonders what was in the Library of Alexander before it was burnt. But when you see something like that happen, you can't help but feel a little bit sad because there must have been certain things in that fire that shouldn't have been burnt. But I guess this was in retaliation, and they saw it as an eye for an eye because the Americans actually burnt down York. Now, you might be thinking they were in England burning down York. No, this is modern day Toronto. I guess it used to be called York, and they actually burned down a bunch of government buildings in that area. And so the Brits saw this as a bit of a we got you back type of thing, which we all know that an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. Not a vibe, but they did it anyway. So you can imagine the capital is completely on fire, and then something remarkable actually happens. A storm comes in and completely puts everything out. There is torrential rain, there is crazy wind gusts, there's reports that there's a tornado. It's so bad that not only does it put out all the fire, but the Brits have to retreat only 26 hours after starting this battle. They have to get out. The British encampment was completely destroyed and they had to do a full retreat. After the Brits had left, the storm had come and gone, the fires have been put out, the Americans came in and did what they do best. They showed resilience, strength, and arrogance by completely rebuilding everything and making it look even better than it was before it was burnt down. And it became a massive sense of pride for the US, saying, hey, look, you might have done this absolutely devastating act, but we're going to come back. We're going to bounce back bigger than ever and show you that we're not going anywhere. Few fun facts about this interesting play of events. Now, the storm that actually came through Washington and put everything out, a lot of the Americans saw this as divine intervention, and it actually just strengthened their thoughts on that we need to keep America what it is because God's on our side, which is absolutely remarkable when you think about it. For a storm to come in on the exact day when it gets taken over by the Brits and burnt down is pretty remarkable, and you can definitely see why a lot of people thought that. Another fun fact is that the picture that the First Lady Dolly actually took of George Washington is still hanging in the White House today, and you can see that. Well, you can't go and see it. You're not going to walk in there and go and see it, but it's there. Just, it's there. Go Google it. It's still in there, which in my opinion is probably one of the most amazing things about this. She stole this picture because she's a fangirl and then put it back up in the White House. And I think that is quite the symbolism for America itself. So ultimately, nothing really came of this apart from burning down buildings, unfortunately burning probably a lot of historical artwork, the Brits having what was probably a really good sit-down dinner in the White House before evacuating because a storm came along, and then the War of 1812 ended in quite a stalemate. So it was a bit of a nothing burger. But what it did do is give the Americans quite a lot of pride in saying, hey, I don't care what you throw at us, we're always going to come back. And some of them even thought that God was on their side. And I think it's quite an amazing story. And for this to be my first story here on YouTube, I hope you really enjoyed it. I thought it was one of the most fascinating ones. I've got a whole list of stories I'd love to tell. And this one just blew my mind the most because I didn't know anything about it before making this video. And I hope you learned something along the way like I did, because it was genuinely really enjoyable. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. If you'd like to see more stories from me rather than just reaction videos and gameplay, let me know in the comment section because I'd love to make more of these. It kind of helps me be a bit more creative whilst also doing something a bit more original and having a lot of fun along the way whilst also learning. And that, in my opinion, is one of the best combinations possible. So thank you for watching. I love you all, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.